Hey everybody, this is Tracy here with another edition of A View from Tracy's Point, and we are here with two updates today. The first one being that Nicole Becker, who you guys know is on the defense team for R&B singer R. Kelly, she has officially joined the Eastern District of New York case, and she will be helping in the defense once that case goes to trial in late August. Nicole has been pretty silent lately. You know, she'll do an interview here and there. And for those of you that haven't been following the case for quite some time, she is a former state prosecutor out of Michigan in their sex crimes division. And so people were wondering if she was going to be a part of the Eastern District of New York case. And so the answer is yes. She's formally filed her paperwork in order to be able to work on that federal case and to get approval. So I think that is a good thing, since she seems to be the only one on this defense team that has some type of experience based on these charges. And then the second thing we're going to talk about is Michael Williams. He finally had his plea hearing, which was held earlier today. And once again, for those of you that haven't been following the case for a while, Michael Williams is one of 3 people that were arrested last year. And the Eastern District of New York is trying desperately to attach these people to R. Kelly's case in their attempt to build this enterprise that they believe he was running, and to support their notion that the reason he should not be released on bond is because he is a threat and that he will engage in witness intimidation. And so the other 2 people that were charged was a guy named Richard Arson, who pled guilty back in February, I believe it was. And I told you guys at that time, they don't tell you in these hearings what these people have agreed to do for the government in exchange for the sentencing that they will get. And they typically won't be sentenced until following R. Kelly's case. And so Richard Arson was scheduled to be sentenced in June, which would have been after the April date when R. Kelly was initially supposed to go to trial. And so I'm still looking to see that sentencing change until later in the year. And so with Michael Williams, his sentencing has been pushed back to October. So if you have worked with a person on a plea agreement, and the person has pled guilty, they've agreed to do whatever it is that you want them to do, or they just, you decide, okay, we don't want to take this person to trial, we're just going to let them plead guilty, you can sentence that person right away. And in the Richard Arson case, I believe they already had they have the probation office that comes up with the sentencing guideline based on the person's prior criminal history, and then they make a recommendation to the judge as to what the person should be sentenced. Now, I believe they had done that with Richard Arson, but with Michael Williams, they're now claiming that they haven't gotten that report yet, and so they don't know exactly what his sentencing will be, but they kind of have an estimate. But in any event, he's not going to be sentenced until October. And how convenient is that, considering that R. Kelly's case has been moved to August, is expected to last about 6 weeks. And so he will be conveniently sentenced following R. Kelly's case. So Michael Williams was accused of setting fire to a car that was parked in the driveway of a home that was being rented by the Clary family. And you guys know that Azriel Clary is one of R. Kelly's former girlfriends or roommates, however you want to put it. And then Richard Arson was accused of trying to bribe or pay off Azriel to keep her from testifying in the case. And then the third person is Don Russell, who was going around claiming that he represented R. Kelly and he had all this information, and he was arrested for threatening people. They were trying to have the showing for surviving R. Kelly, and he was accused of calling in threats and then also trying to threaten another alleged victim of his. So in the Richard Williams case, which was heard today, in the Michael Williams case that was heard today, he was originally indicted on 2 counts. The first count was witness tampering, and on or about June 11, 2020, within the Eastern District of New York and elsewhere, the defendant, Michael Williams, together with others, did knowingly and intentionally use intimidation and threaten and attempt to use intimidation, threaten and corruptly persuade another person, to wit, Jane Doe, an individual whose identity is known to the grand jury, and engage in misleading conduct toward Jane Doe with intent to influence, delay, and prevent the testimony of Jane Doe in an official proceeding. So we know that the car, first of all, Jane Doe, Azriel Clary, that was not her legal residence. That was number one. Number two, the car that was set on fire did not belong to her. So they can't say that he set the car on fire in order to intimidate her when, one, he probably didn't even know she lived there, and number two, or was staying there, and number two, the car was not hers. And then in the second count against him, which was arson, it says on about June 11, 2020, within the Southern District of Florida, the defendant, Michael Williams, together with others, did knowingly, intentionally, and maliciously damage and destroy by means of fire and an explosive a vehicle used in interstate and foreign commerce, and in an activity used in interstate and foreign commerce. So this is the count that he actually pled guilty to. And, he admits that he set the car on fire. Okay, we saw the car was set on fire, right? But this car actually belonged to Enterprise Rental Company. It was leased from them. And so I don't think that technically they could prove that he was going after Azriel when he set the car on fire. But it would be reasonable to believe that he drove all the way from Georgia to where, and then also they stated in the hearing today that it was in Kissimmee, but I thought it was in Polk County, or maybe Kissimmee is part of Polk County. But in any event, we know he drove from Georgia to Florida to set the car on fire. However, we don't know why he did it, but it's more reasonable to believe that he did it because his cousin, Cash Jones, whose name keeps appearing all over the place, was in some type of relationship with Angelo Clary, who is Azriel Clary's father. And at the time, those two were beefing and going back and forth, having their relationship problems, all over the internet, okay? And so there was some friction between the two of them. He's the cousin of Cash Jones, so it would be more reasonable to believe that the reason he set this car on fire was in retaliation for Cash and whatever was going on with Angelo, than it would be to believe that he did this on behalf of R. Kelly, who he probably doesn't even know and has never met. So the court proceeding today took about 30 minutes, and it was pretty much procedural stuff. And I believe that Michael Williams is, of all the three people, Don Russell, Richard Arline, and Michael, he was the only one that has been incarcerated since the incident happened. And that is probably because of the nature of the charges against him. And so he has had two plea hearings postponed due to some type of illness. And during the proceeding, the judge did ask him about his health, and he talked about being asthmatic and suffering from severe depression. And at one point he did say something and the volume went down kind of low, and I couldn't really understand whether he was saying that he had the virus, as in the coronavirus, or not. So don't quote me on that, but it did sound like he said something about a virus. Okay, and so we know he's being treated for depression wherever he is being held, and he has dealt with depression throughout his life in his youth. And so we do know that there may be some type of mental illness going on. So why they would think that it was okay to allow him to plea in this case, I don't know. But in any event, they did. They felt that he was of sound mind. His lawyer attested to the fact that despite any issues that he has experienced, that those issues were based on, especially the recent depression, was more so because he's incarcerated, not because of anything else, and that, you know, most people are depressed when they're locked up. He was incarcerated before in 2012, and so he has some issues going on. She asked him, you know, his age, his full name, his education level. He said that he dropped out of high school in 10th grade. However, he has received vocational training to learn skills later on in life. And pretty much that was it. And, you know, like I said, they're not going to tell you what was in the plea agreement, what was promised to him, what he promised to tell, or what he said, what information he gave to them as to why he set the car on fire. And which leads me to believe that he's going to try and implicate R. Kelly in whatever he did. And if he's not going to implicate R. Kelly, he's going to implicate Don Russell, because those are the only two options. And I sincerely believe, and I said this with the Richard Arline case, if these two guys were refusing to implicate R. Kelly, then the next move for the government would be to get them to implicate Don Russell. And then by implicating Don Russell, then they can put more pressure on Don Russell to say that he encouraged them to do whatever they did in order to help R. Kelly. And then Don Russell would be facing a lot more time in jail, which might tempt him to flip on R. Kelly. You guys get what I'm saying? And so it doesn't necessarily mean that Richard Arline or Michael Williams said that they knew R. Kelly, that R. Kelly contacted them and said, hey, make this bribe, or hey, go set this car on fire. But they could say that Don Russell told them to do it. And then that puts the pressure on Don Russell to go ahead and flip on R. Kelly and make up whatever lies he wants to make up and stories that he wants to tell. So in terms of sentencing, for the charges that he's facing and the count that he pled guilty to, he could be facing 5 to 20 years in prison. And then following his imprisonment, he would be looking at 3 years probation. And then he would, she said something about without time served, like if he gets out on probation and then he violates, he could be sentenced to 2 years, but he wouldn't get time served for any prison sentence in that 5 to 20 years. He would be facing a $250,000 fine. He would have to pay restitution to Enterprise because it was their car, it wasn't the Clary's car, and then he would have an automatic $100 assessment. But because he is pleading guilty and has entered into a plea agreement with the government, that he is considered a category 3 because he has been incarcerated before. And then they talked about him receiving +2 points, you know, based on his past history, and then -3 points because he's helping the government and all this kind of stuff. And so he would be facing 57 to 71 months, but because of these added points and other things going on with the case, he could potentially be looking at 60 to 71 months. And because they haven't gotten the report back from the probation office who determines the sentencing guidelines based on everything that's involved, they can't guarantee him that. And so, of course, he had to acknowledge that this is just an estimate and that he could receive more time. And if he does receive more time, that there's really nothing that he can do about it. And that was pretty much it. Once again, I believe that the ultimate goal, if they're not implicating R. Kelly directly, the ultimate goal is for them to somehow connect Don Russell, and then the government can put pressure on Don Russell to flip against R. Kelly, and they'll probably be trying to threaten Don Russell with like a 50 years in prison or something like that to get him to turn. And so it would be very interesting to see what happens with all of this and how this comes down. And once again, his sentencing is going to be October 5th at 11 o'clock a.m. I expect to see Richard Arline's sentencing pushed back to October as well. And then one more thing before I go. I thought it was interesting, when they asked him to, tell the court what it is that you did that you're pleading guilty to. He said that he, drove to Florida and he set this car on fire. And he's guilty. Okay, but why didn't you guys ask him why did he drive to Florida and set the car on fire? Who was his intended target when he drove to Florida and set the car on fire? They didn't ask any of those questions. They just asked him that one question, which was, tell us what you did. And he basically said that he says, I drove to Kissimmee to set a car on fire in a driveway on June 11th. So that was his statement of what he did. No who, what, when, where, why, or how. Okay, as to what made you just wake up one day on June 11th and decide to drive to Florida and set this car on fire. And whose car did you think you were setting on fire? None of that came out. And then they had to say that the car that the reason he was being charged with interstate commerce is because the car belonged to Enterprise, and that Enterprise is headquartered in Missouri, and that's what made it interstate commerce, which makes it a federal crime. So I think that was it, guys. It was, like I said, it was a 30-minute hearing, but it was more technicality than anything else. So that's it for me. Go ahead, leave your comments below, rate the video, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And until the next time, I shall talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.